Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. Since the pandemic began, a bright spotlight was cast over the education industry. The disparities and inequities that have existed for as long as compulsory education has been around are now receiving the attention that should have been given all along. Suddenly, people have become experts on what is wrong with our schools, though no one has really proposed any real solutions. Additionally, these so-called experts, many who have no education background, may have misidentified the primary concerns of today's teachers. It is easy to point out that teachers are disgruntled because of the low pay. But then again, who wouldn't be? Also, in many cities, teacher starting salary can be as high as $58,000, with many teachers making six figures after a few years. So, if money isn't a major concern for teachers, what is? A new Harris poll commissioned by the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools may have the answer. To interpret the findings of this poll that surveyed over 1,200 public school teachers in this country, today we welcome back to the classroom Ms. Debbie Veney, Vice President of Communications and Marketing at the National Alliance of Public Charter Schools. Ms. Veney, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin.
What was the impetus for the Harris poll this time around, and what did it find? So
this time around, we were trying to get a better idea of exactly what was behind the teacher shortages that we've been hearing about, pretty regularly broadcast, and it's almost in every written publication. We know that people are losing their minds. They can't get enough teachers into classrooms and they're pulling people out of retirement. So we were really curious to understand what's behind all of that? And are there some things that are working? Are there things that we should know about as best practices to scale and replicate? Are there things that we should stop doing? And what do teachers themselves have to say about this?
And I guess what were some of the results? Because as I mentioned, most people would just automatically look at, okay, teachers are upset because of the low pay. Or teachers are upset, or they turn it around and say, well, what are you upset about? You have summers off and you only work half a day. You work 6 hours a day and so forth and so on. You get all holidays off and now you're increasing the holidays. So all this time you have off, what do you have to be upset about? So what were some of the things that teachers actually said?
I'll tell you, the one thing that surprised me the most when we asked teachers what they saw as the top challenges in the classroom, I expected that the number one answer was going to be pay, or everything that you just said. But actually, the number one answer was discipline and behavioral issues. There was about a 10 percentage point gap between the number one and number two item, between behavior and discipline and pay. So that really shocked me.
And I can imagine why as well, because, again, it's a situation, having been in the classroom, I can see where the teachers are going to have those struggles, especially you have it's a combination of things. You have a transient society. You have people who are moving in and out of classrooms all the time. You have people who are moving in and out of the country all the time. So education is stalled at some points, is interrupted. And then you have just the outer community coming into the schools. So there's all of that going on that most people just either don't see or don't want to see. So I think now is an important time to listen to our teachers.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. Now, I've never been a teacher, but I was that super parent. So I was a classroom mom. I was, volunteering for playground duty. I would monitor classrooms during the teacher meetings and stuff like that. So classroom management it can be tough. And I completely understand why that would be such an important issue. I can remember in my little bit of time, filling in and at my daughter's school, sometimes there were some children that were a little rowdy. And as we have a lot more kids who are struggling with mental health issues post-pandemic and the rest of it, I can see how that would be an even bigger issue. I
want to get to that in a moment as far as that being one of the other things that teachers point to. But let's think about, I guess, in terms of, I don't know if the Harris poll addressed this, but in terms of solutions, because we know that, again, we talk about the discipline being the number one thing that teachers are concerned about. And when you think about teachers are in classrooms of 25 or more students and they're there by themselves, how many, and you can probably attest to it, but how many parents would want to be around 25, whether they're 8-year-olds or 16-year-olds? How many would want to be around 25 or 30 of them by yourselves? Let alone, but we expect our teachers to be able to do this in everything.
We do. And, I'm going to step carefully here because the culture in our society has changed so much. So there was a time when we were just stricter as a society with respect to how people did child rearing and child, discipline and behavior. We have become in many ways a kinder, gentler society in that way. But that also means that, you got more little children falling out in the grocery store and maybe falling out in the classroom.
No, you're absolutely right. Because there was a time I can remember we had a community approach to discipline, because it was if you were acting out on the block or in school and Miss Johnson down the street saw you do it, she said, wait till I'm going to tell your father when he gets home.
Exactly.
And it was that type of thing. Now it's like if Miss Johnson sees you and says, I'm going to tell your father, well, the kid may first flip her off. And then if she does go and tell, now the parents are like, well, who are you to raise my child? You have to tell me how to raise my child. So it gets into all of, like you said, we have become, I don't know if it's necessarily become a kinder and gentler society, but I think we've become a more hands-off society.
I think that's right. Yes, we have become much more hands-off.
So let me ask you this, and because we know that politics, unfortunately, has always seemed to find its way into education. Has that gotten worse over the last few years, especially with the pandemic? Has this involvement gotten worse?
Oh, for sure. There is this hyper interest in everything happening in every teacher's classroom, down to trying to select the books that teachers can use to teach their kids. And these teachers have been in the classroom for like 20 plus years, and there's never been a problem. And, all of a sudden it kind of is now. And, also literally getting down to the actual subject matter that teachers are free to discuss. And, we've seen state legislatures enacting laws that are significantly prohibiting what can be said. And the irony here is it's around the guise of, freedom of speech, but you're like limiting the speech in the classrooms in terms of what teachers can say and what they can teach. So this is definitely ramped up. I mean, certainly within the past 2 to 3 years, it's gotten a lot more prevalent.
And we know that, I guess, one of the areas that has taken a lot of heat and a lot of flack for this, especially from politicians and school boards and teachers unions and so forth, are charter schools.
Yes.
But with all of the flack and the heat that they've been taking, I understand that there are some victories that happened recently. So what are some of the victories that charter schools have, or the charter school movement has experienced so far?
Well, I think our biggest thing is that we just got a new charter law in the state of Montana. So that makes now 46 states plus the District of Columbia and Guam that have charter school laws in place. So we're pretty excited about that. That was a big one. Now they're starting to rise up and fight us already in Montana and trying to question the constitutionality of that law. We've seen that play out many times before. We will prevail. It is constitutional. But, sometimes that happens and right after the law gets passed. Another really big one, we are going to be able to open more charter schools in New York City.
All right.
So that's pretty awesome, right? There's been a cap that's been in place for a number of years, and demand is through the roof. So this is really pretty awesome.
So let's talk about that for a second, because we know there was this cap on the charter schools, at least in New York City. I think the rest of New York State wasn't underneath the same auspices, but at least in New York City there was. But at the same time, you have this high demand from the public, from the families who are sending their students to these schools to have more charter schools, but they couldn't happen. So why the pushback? Do you think there was so much pushback against the families who clearly want this? And even, I think, according to the poll, there were some teachers who were in favor of it, at least from the school choice perspective. So if there's all of this positivity and desire for it, why the pushback?
Special interest groups. I mean, that's really what that comes down to. So sadly, there is a chasm, a disconnect between the people who put elected officials in office and those elected officials in terms of what their agendas are. And that's sad. I'm really so encouraged by Kathy Hochul's courageous leadership on this issue. I was kind of impressed during the campaign trail where she got asked a direct question about support for charter schools, and she was clear and didn't stutter and said yes. I'm like, okay, lady, I see you. I like what you're talking about. And then, she stuck to her guns and came down in support of families and students, because exactly what you're saying, the demand is high. And I really think it's pretty bold for people to presume that they know better about what someone else's child needs than that actual parent. Yeah,
you're absolutely right, especially when parents want the best for their children. Obviously, all parents want the best for their children. They want to be able to provide them with the best opportunities to learn and go forward. And if that means going to a charter school, then why not? Because I think that if the district schools were doing what they were supposed to do, then charter schools wouldn't have there wouldn't be a demand for them, because they wouldn't have a leg to stand on in this case. But because they're offering something different, because they're offering a more positive pathway to success in obtaining an education, that's what parents are looking for.
I think they absolutely, you nailed it. That's exactly right. Parents might not be education policy experts like me or, former educators like yourself, but they're not dumb. And they know when their kids are not being well served. They're crystal clear on what constitutes a good school or not so good school. And they are using their agency to go out and find a better option than what's being served up to them. I'll tell you something that has really blown my mind. The homeschooling movement has just gone bananas over the past few years. And this is an interesting stat that I actually got from another poll that we did with Harris Poll last year. About 25% of people who homeschool their kids do not have a high school diploma.
Wow.
Gone are the days when you could tell a family, this is the only choice you've got and just like it. This is it. Now parents are getting far more savvy and they're saying, you know what, I won't let you make that choice for me. And even if you don't offer me a better public education option, I'm just going to take my kid out of this school. And we've got folks that are like, you know what, I think I could teach my kid kindergarten. I might not be able to do advanced calculus, but I'm going to take my chances on kindergarten. And we're seeing the numbers really, really grow where there is not capacity for new charter schools.
You raised a very interesting point there as far as the homeschooling. I think that, I don't know if that became a thing because of the pandemic, since kids were home now learning virtually and parents had to kind of teach their students anyway. So I guess they figured, if I'm doing this anyway, I might as well go ahead and pull them out and have them be here all the time. Since I'm home and they're home, now we can learn together type of thing. But I think the danger in that, and what, again, my educator had just goes on here, but the danger in that is you have people who may not be completely qualified to to deliver the education, to deliver the curriculum at a rigorous level. So how can we, being homeschooled, how can we assure that the students are getting the same level of rigor that they need, that they would get from a regular school?
There's not assurances. Being homeschooled, students are not going to have to take the statewide annual assessment, for example. That would be required if they're enrolled in a public school, either district or charter school. And, there are some really great options for parents who want to have a different, more hands-on approach in their child's education within the charter sector. And so I agree with you. It is a little bit scary. And I put that example out there just to remind your listeners that this is not a game to parents. I mean, they're dead serious about this. And they are not going to settle for a subpar option. They just aren't going to do it anymore.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is Debbie Veney, Vice President of Communications and Marketing at the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. Now, I don't want to sound that I'm trying to come down on people who homeschool their children and everything, because, of course, and I think the pandemic has something to do with this as well, as far as just being able to go out and get resources, because we know that there's curriculum online that they can pull down, they can download and have. I think every major school district has posted their own curriculum, so they can do that. They can go onto their state educational websites and get the supplies and materials. I think most of the books are also in PDF form, so you can get the materials you need in order to homeschool. And of course, there are other regulations that go along with that. But I think the important thing is there are now options, and
that's right.
And parents and families and caregivers are more than willing to exercise those options.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you, what do you say to those schools and those districts, the regular district schools that claim charter schools cherry pick, and they just pick the best students in the district that come to them, which that now depletes all the really top-notch students from the regular schools, because the charter schools have just snatched up all the top-level students?
Lies. That's what I say. Number one, it's just not, it's not even legal. So charter schools literally have to take every kid that comes to their door. We cannot pick any kid. And there's some new data that just came out a couple weeks ago. The CREDO data, the Center for, I'm going to do it wrong. It's at Stanford, and it's Mackie Raymond. I don't want to get the acronyms wrong, but CREDO. She has just published a next big chunk of research about the effectiveness of charter schools. And she's done this a few times. And the first times we got smacked around, we were not doing so well. And, she's a researcher. She's true to her craft, and, called us out for charter schools actually not en masse performing better than their district counterparts. Then her next set of research said that we were on average about the same as the average district school, although we were outperforming with kids who have the greatest needs and with kids who are Black and Latino. Now, this latest data just put all that to rest and said that we actually are doing better. We were outperforming our district counterparts and getting at the creaming issue or the skimming issue. When we look at assessment data for first-year charter school students, they are not coming in looking like they're in the Mensa Society. They are struggling, okay? And it is being in that charter school that is able to, it's how these kids are able to grow and to become stronger over time academically. But they're not coming in setting the world on fire. These kids are struggling academically the same as their counterparts are in district schools.
So what's the magic bullet? What's the magic elixir here then? If they're coming in, we'll say they're coming in at level 2 and they're leaving at a high 3. What's the elixir? How is it possible? What are charter schools doing that the district school may not be doing?
Well, there's a lot of flexibility within the charter model that allows instructors to do whatever it takes to meet kids where they are. So, for example, you've got a kid coming into middle school, a fifth grader. A lot of charter schools or middle schools coming in, say, a fifth grader on a second grade reading level. They've got the flexibility to really extend instructional time around reading and to give that kid more time. For example, they can extend the school day, they can extend the school year, they can bring in different curricular supports, which are not handed down by a central office, but they literally have the ability to make those changes themselves. Also, I've seen some fascinating things that charter schools are able to do where they can creatively use Title I money and get instructional aides so that you really have like 2 to 3 teachers in a given classroom. And it gives you a lot more individualized instruction per kid. So there are lots of just flexibilities and autonomies within the charter setting that allow teachers to be able to really do amazing things.
So that sounds like it's a no-brainer. If you have students who need extra support, you do what you need to do to provide that support. Mm-hmm. And I know you're not going to be able to answer this, but I guess the obvious question is, why isn't it happening in other schools?
Well, there are structural barriers to that in other schools. So there are, for example, collective bargaining agreements, which might say that one can only teach 45 minutes of math a day, period. And if one goes beyond that, then there's a whole fight with the union, and we don't want that. The school day must start at this time, it must end at that time. So there's a lot of rules, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of extra barriers to flexibility that exist in other kinds of schools. And I don't think that there's anything I don't think the teachers in district schools are any less committed to doing the best they can for their kids. I think that there are barriers that prevent them from being able to be as innovative, creative, flexible, nimble as they would like to be.
So I'm glad you mentioned that part as well, as far as the different barriers that do exist. And it's not just in district schools, it's in charter school areas as well. So going back to the poll, I know there was a large percentage of people who talked about, even if they didn't leave themselves, they can understand why other people had left. So what are some of the reasons, I guess, that were stated why people are leaving the profession?
Teachers just feel like they're under siege. So they're being asked to do a whole lot more than teach. They're burned out. They're overwhelmed. They're worried. They're anxious. And they have so much that being piled upon them. They don't feel respected. They don't feel that they have a voice within their schools. They don't feel that they are respected as professionals, that decisions are made for them and not with them, in partnership with them. It's a high calling. Teaching is hard work, even under the best of circumstances. It's, as you said, a classroom full of like little children. It's just one of you. It's hard work. And I think it becomes that much more difficult when they're not in settings where they feel like they have a voice or they're being valued.
I'm glad you mentioned that, as far as it being hard work, because I often will recall or paraphrase the old ad campaign from the Army from the 70s. It said, we do more before 9 a.m. than most people do all day. Well, that's teaching. They do more before in a day than most people do all week, type of thing, because all the different hats that they wear. I think there was a study that said that teachers make something like 10,000 decisions in a particular day, every day.
Wow.
Because of all the students that they have and just themselves and everything that's going on. They're just making so many different decisions. And a lot of things are because the students can't make the decisions themselves, so they have to make it for them. So we know. So then, yes, they may be feeling overwhelmed and so forth. So let's get to, as far as this teacher shortage, is the shortage therefore a retention issue, a recruitment issue, or maybe a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. Although there are some interesting differences that we saw within the charter sector. Well, let me back up and say, first of all, fewer people are entering education programs. So it's not as popular a major these days. So we've got just a diminishing pipeline of teachers coming into it. We do have a lot of people who are retiring. They're getting older and it's time for them to leave the classroom. And it's hard in there. So between fewer people coming in, people getting old and leaving, and people being stressed who are already in there, that's why you got a shortage. And when we are able to listen to the specific types of environmental conditions that help teachers to be happier, we stand a better chance of being able to retain and keep them in the classroom. Another thing that's really interesting is being open-minded about some of the newer certification routes into teaching. And certainly charter schools tend to be more open with that. They'll take, a person like me, I'm a person who majored in journalism and my master's is also in communication. be a pretty good English teacher if I took a couple classes and I really like it and I love kids. And so they'll take a person like me and say, you know what, I think we can work with you because your heart's in it and, you know, you want to learn the pedagogical part of it and learn to be a professional educator. They're more open to taking people who might not have taken the traditional route, but have a lot to offer and want to give back.
I think that's a pathway that a lot of different school districts around the country are actually exploring now, and it may have been started with the charter movement. And that's taking those people from, I guess, and putting them in alternative pathways, because you don't have a lot of people going into the profession from the college level. So they may now they're coming out of it or coming into it from other experiences. So like you might have a journalism background, you might have an engineering background, and now you want to come into teaching for whatever the reason is, and you can still utilize those skills and so forth. But now we just need to get you the pedagogical part to get you licensed in order to be able to stand in front of the classroom. And I think the charter school area has been a lot more patient with that. And I think that's also something that there are some school districts. I know New York City, for example, has explored that as well. I think they have about 2 or 3, maybe even more alternative pathway programs that teachers can go into. But I think that's one way to recruit and hopefully also retain people.
Yeah. I wanted to tell you about the most interesting stat I saw coming out of the Harris Poll study. I told you the discipline one was pretty interesting, but the most interesting one is there's actually this inverse relationship with respect to motivation and staying in the classroom if you look at the 2 different types of public school teachers. So interestingly enough, everybody kind of comes in excited, freshly minted teachers, they're going to put up their little bulletin boards, they're very happy. And over time, it can wear people down. Yeah. So a lot of people become less motivated over the course of the time that they are in the classroom. But interestingly enough, that happens less often in charter schools. And in fact, 55% of charter school teachers say that they are more motivated the longer they stay in the classroom. And about 80% say that they are at least as motivated, if not more, than when they began teaching. And we see that those numbers are starkly different on the district school side. So only about 20% of charter school teachers say that they're less motivated, but you've got 34% of district teachers who say that they are more motivated than when they started. So wow, it's a pretty stark difference.
No, you're absolutely right. That is a big difference. I know we could have this conversation really for a long time, and I would like to have you back. Obviously, I mean, we can do this yearly thing going forward.
We don't have to wait a whole year.
Not a problem. But we would definitely like to thank our guest today, Ms. Debbie Veney, Vice President of Communications and Marketing at the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, for coming on to our show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.